I want to conclude with the insects that feed with piercing sucking mouth parts on trees and shrubs, discussing some of the true bugs that you find, some of which feed on leaves and some of which feed on seeds. Those that feed on seeds sometimes become a big issue because they are ones that might enter buildings and act as nuisance invaders. So, one important family in many parts of North America that occur on a wide variety of plants, mostly shrubs, but also some deciduous trees, are what we call lace bugs. And these get their name because the adults, and you can see a picture of the adult in the upper left, has a kind of lacy appearance. They're very unique looking insects. The lace bugs will feed on the plants. They will feed in a way that produces small light spots, an injury we call stippling, because they feed on individual cell contents rather than feeding on the phloem. And so the area that they feed is evacuated of cell contents and looks light. They also, typical of insects that feed on these on cell contents with sucking mouth parts, excrete dark droplets that will then dry up. Anyway, in this picture we have an adult, typical lace bug, lacy wings. The nymphs do not have those lacy wings. You can see the dark spots associated with both these pictures. And the eggs will be laid in a mass, in this case on the midrib of the underside of the leaf. So a typical kind of injury you might see with a lace bug, this would be one we get here on chokecherry, but you look at the upper leaf surface and it's got little white spots, or if there's a lot of injury, it coalesces to be generally light, but these are produced by individual feeding wounds evacuating the cell contents, the injury we call stippling. And then flip them over, you will find the insects themselves, but also the tar spots, the term we give for the excrement they produce when it dries up. So it's actually a very distinctive type of injury. There are many kinds of lace bugs on a wide variety of trees, shrubs, indicating here the ones on oak, ones on walnut, aster for one that is an herbaceous host, sycamore. Azalea lace bug is becoming a big issue now that it's in the Pacific Northwest. It's long been a quite significant insect on azaleas in the eastern U.S., but has been shifted. It got moved accidentally to the Northwest. And again, one final picture, in this case, one that we find here on hackberry. Flip the underside over, you can see the adult in this picture, a bunch of nymphs, maybe the old skins will be what's all that's left, little dark spots, and the upper surface, the light coloration caused by those stippling type of wounds that they make. Moving on to another family, the plant bugs, kind of a name that is a little uninspired since all these bugs are feeding on plants, but there is one family called the plant bugs. And these are insects that will feed in a fairly destructive manner, the lacerate and flush feeding, where they will damage lots of cells with their mouth parts and introduce saliva that further breaks down cells and then suck up the area. So everywhere they feed is a dead spot. The feeding is also concentrated on younger leaves as well as flowers and developing seeds. So we're going to see both injuries on leaves and flowers, but also on fruits and seeds. So an example here, four-line plant bug, pretty common plant bug on a wide variety of trees in the Midwest. In this picture on the lower right, it shows the individual wounds made on a cucumber, which is another host. And you can see, I think, that these are dead areas. They're also water soaked, but these are areas that have been killed through a single feeding event, through this lacerate and flush feeding. And the plant, if it's a thicker leaf, you might get some wound response, and some callus tissue is indicated on the picture on the right. But again, cell death around the feeding point. If they're feeding on young leaves, you're going to get distortions. So a pretty widespread insect where honey locust is grown is the honey locust plant bug. The eggs hatch very shortly after buds break, and the young stages of the honey locust plant bug, the nymphs, will be out and feeding on the new growth. And where they feed, they will kill. They will kill the spots. And if this is a very young leaf, the leaf may be entirely killed with a feeding event. If it's an older leaf, areas of the leaf will be killed and the remaining tissues will continue to grow, but you'll have twisting and distortion. Picture in the upper left shows large numbers of nymphs on the honey locust. By the way, these are sometimes mistaken by arborists as aphids because they sort of look like an aphid in general form, but behave very differently, very active insects, which aphids are not. Also lack the cornicles, the tailpipes of an aphid. So the nymphs will feed on the new growth. Again, that new growth, if it's damaged, may become a leaflet that is completely killed or has a large dead area, so it will grow distorted. And during outbreak years, the leaves will be so badly damaged that they never really fully extend until after the outbreak is over. This is a one-generation insect. They finish their generation and become adults in June and lay eggs, so it will be over at that point. But the trees can be very, very thin. That would be the typical appearance that people would notice. Oh, the honey locusts are looking so thin this year. And that's because the new growth has been hammered back by plant bugs feeding on the growth as it attempted to come out but failed. Again, the leaves that are damaged but remain on the plant will show the symptoms of injury for as long as they stay on the plant, which may be the rest of the summer. But there'll be a dead spot or curl or something that is produced in the sites where they were feeding on it. One last example of a plant bug on leaves would be the ones on ash. And there's actually several species. So ash will we have an ash plant bug on the adult on the upper left and some nymphs on the right. And again, a different species of ash plant bug here from Ohio. And if the leaves are young and they're feeding on it and they kill it, you might have a large dead area and the leaves will then grow in a distorted way. If the leaves have already fully expanded, and this insect can have 2 generations a year in some areas, then on the fully developed leaves, you don't get any curling or distortion, but the areas where they feed show up as dead spots from the feeding wounds they make. And then there's one group of plant bugs that will allow us to transition into the separate topic, feeding on the flowers and fruits. A very important genus of plant bugs is Lygus. Lygus bugs, one of the best known as the tarnished plant bug. Where I live, it's the western tarnished plant bug or the pale legume bug, but they're all in the genus Lygus. And these are more commonly associated with damage to flowers and developing fruit or seed, although they can also distort the new growth. So the kind of injuries you will see when plant bugs feed on flowers or developing fruit are indicated here. There might be distortions of the petals, as indicated in the lower left. In the upper right, though, is a kind of injury we discussed a little in the last class called cat-facing injury. In this case, on some pears, those individual dimples are in sites where Lygus plant bugs had fed when that was a young pear. The areas are killed. In this case, the pear continued to develop. It did not abort, but the areas around it grew, and the damaged areas did not, creating this little puckering, or sometimes called cat facing. In the lower right is damage to the internal contents of a cotton boll, the fruit of a cotton plant, by Lygus bugs. So this transitions into some of the bugs that feed on seeds and fruits, and there are many seed-feeding bugs in many families. The big 5 families of true bugs that will feed on flowers, fruits, and seeds are the plant bugs we've talked about. Some stink bugs, a family known as the scentless plant bugs, a family known as the leaf-footed bugs, and finally one we call the seed bugs. So stink bugs are a family of bugs that are usually fairly large. They're comparatively to other members of this order, and broadly oval or shield shape in the back. And when these will feed on developing flowers, often the flowers may abort. If they feed on a young fruit or seed, then the area is killed. So we're seeing some pecans in the upper right. Uh, the dark area in the one on the left of that picture is a site that had been damaged when it was a developing nut uh, by a stink bug. We're seeing on the lower right a bunch of the brown marmorated stink bugs feeding on fruit, and that will result in dead spots everywhere they feed and a misshapen and unsaleable fruit. So this brown marmorated stink bug is an insect that's received, for good reason, quite a bit of attention. It's just a non-native species that found its way into North America uh, in the last 3 decades and is particularly damaging in the eastern U.S., where it was originally found, mid-Atlantic states to the Carolinas. This insect has a very wide host range and will feed on developing fruits and flowers of many plants, including vegetable crops and as well as fruit crops and some of the fruits and seeds of ornamental plants. But the big issue for many places is that this is a really common insect that has the unfortunate habit of entering buildings in autumn. So it is a nuisance invader, one of the top most important nuisance invaders, insects that move into buildings temporarily for shelter or some other purpose, do not reproduce in a home, but by being in the home, particularly when they're in large numbers, can drive people crazy. And this one also has a little bit of odor to it, so that adds insult to injury. So this is a primarily important to many people because they find it in their home in autumn and early winter. Uh, there's also several seed bugs that develop on the seeds of plants that enter homes. Not many, but a couple. So one would be the birch catkin bug. This is an insect that feeds on developing seeds of birch. No damage ever noticed, but for some reason, the birch catkin bug is one that comes into buildings. A new insect into North America, the elm seed bug, is moving from the west coast to the east. It's just been found Colorado. We are now the furthest east. It's been found western Colorado in 2017. Anyway, it develops on elm seeds. Nobody cares about elm seeds much, but they do care when these things start massing on buildings and coming into buildings. In this case, they come in summer. Then a kind of peculiar looking insect that has become quite common as a nuisance invader of homes is called the western conifer seed bug, an insect that was native to the western U.S. but has spread dramatically to now encompass most of the United States. It's a type of leaf-footed bug, a family of bugs that often has large extensions on the hind legs. That would be the leaf-footed part. And the western conifer seed bug is one that feeds on seeds, mostly conifer seeds, as the name would suggest. Uh, Eggs are usually laid on pines. The young nymphs will develop from there, and the adults will feed. The nymphs and adults will mostly feed on cones, developing cones. And again, most people don't care about this kind of injury. It is a problem for people producing pines for seed regeneration because the seeds can be damaged in a way so they won't germinate. But for most people, that's not an issue. The problem is that this insect comes into buildings. It comes into buildings in the fall. Not the nymphs, but the adults. So it would be the nymphs. The adults coming in the fall. And something that looks like this, walking around a house, is often a bit too much for many people. And again, this has become one of the top nuisance invaders, insects that are moving off our landscape plants into our buildings and causing an issue in that regard by being in the home. Western conifer seed bug has this habit. There are other leaf-footed bugs in North America. The one that we have in this part of the country, the western leaf-footed bug, is not one that comes into houses, but it is one that sometimes will mass on the outsides of houses. There's a large number of other leaf-footed bugs that can be important, particularly in the southern U.S. And some of these are important for for feeding on seeds and fruit of many cultivated crops. But only the conifer seed bug comes into buildings of all of these. Western conifer seed bug, an insect that is in the scentless plant bug family that sometimes found massing on homes is the golden rain tree bug, an insect that develops on seeds of golden rain tree or soapberries, sometimes in very large numbers. The adults, you can see, have the fully developed wings. The nymphs do not, so they look kind of reddish. You can see the wing covers there. These are sometimes called a red-shouldered bug, but that term is not desired because many true bugs have kind of red markings as does this, but this is limited to certain kinds of plants. And the issue is sometimes that they mass on the buildings. The seeds of these trees are not economically important. And then there's the nuisance invader number one in the United States, at least much of the United States, and that would be the box elder bug, quintessential nuisance invader, a species that in nature is native to North America. It develops on the seeds primarily of box elder, a kind of maple. It may develop on the seeds of a couple of other maples and rarely seeds of other plants, but it's a seed feeder. And we see the eggs in the upper left laid on the seeds of a maple. On the lower, upper right. In the lower left, we see the eggs and a newly hatched nymph. In the lower right, we see adults with full coloration. There's one that's kind of red, and that just hasn't hardened up, fully hardened up after a molt. It's still soft, hasn't gone through sclerotization, as well as a couple of nymphs with the wing pads. So again, we don't worry about box elder bugs because they feed on box elder seeds. We worry about them because in autumn, they often will use homes as the place to get through winter. This is one bug that, for whatever reason, finds buildings to be a very attractive site. So you will see them massing on the sides of the buildings, south and west sides, in autumn, and they will find little cracks and crevices that allow them to get behind the walls. And there they'll hunker down and spend the winter in a dormant state, but during warm periods may periodically wake up a little bit and walk around a little bit, and they'll dribble into the living space until late the next spring. Most of them will move back outdoors, but some of them make the wrong turn and find them crawling across the television set. And these can be quite abundant. I don't know, this is a little clipping I got a kick out of. You probably don't know what I'm talking about when I say Y2K, but a little background. It was all the computers were supposed to not be able to recognize the year 2000 because of the way their internal clocks were set. And it was going to be the end of the world. All the computers were going to crash. And they didn't, obviously. But in Ouray County in Colorado, at about that time, the computers did crash, and it was from a real bug. The box elder bugs got into the county computers and made them inoperable, short-circuited them. Anyway, thought that was the true Y2K bug. So this kind of problem, these nuisance invaders, which usually involve insects that were feeding on landscape plants but become problems when they enter buildings, this is a huge type of problem that I have to handle. It's one of the more common kinds of complaints people have about insects in general. Bugs they find in the home, just temporarily using the home, not reproducing in the home, feeding on something outside, not biting, not eating anything, but just there. So when I get a call like this, generally what they'll go through in terms of general principles would be to tell people, they're in the house now. It's winter, spring, in the house now. Fairly little you can do now at this point, but what you can do to prevent it from happening a year from now would be to seal the building prior to the time when that insect enters the building. In box elder bugs, it might be sometime in September, typically. Others might even start entering buildings before Labor Day. So sealing the building, caulking for the most part, Possibly you could use insecticides to around cracks and crevices, spot treatments to supplement this control. And sometimes people will put drying dust like silica aerogel or diatomaceous earth behind the walls to kill those that make their way behind the wall, but uh, where they will then die, but they will be prevented from moving into the living area. Perhaps treating or removing host plants. If you had a female box elder tree, you could remove that, but a lot of these insects will move long distances, and uh, they may not be originating from the plants right around your house. And then, right now, the best you can do is dispatch individual insects as they're observed uh, through vacuuming or crushing them or whatever, however you wish to do that. But I also find when we have these class of problems, these nuisance invaders, again, they're not reproducing, they're not biting the kids, they're not eating the stuff in the kitchen. To just keep in mind that these insects are not reproducing in the home. I mean, ultimately, the problem will end. They'll either move out of the house on their own or they'll die in the home. So these are self-limiting. And then if they're still on the phone, I tell them, remember, these kind of problems happen to the nicest of people. It's not your fault. So sometimes people just, they just feel they're doing something wrong if they get bugs in their home. But anybody could have box elder bugs if you lived in a box elder bug area, or brown marmorated stink bug, or multicolored Asian lady beetles. That's another one we haven't mentioned yet. Anyway, box elder bug brings up the issue that we should keep these nuisance invaders in proper perspective, and I've been inspired by there being a whole book written just about box elder bugs and various poems and essays. This book illustrated here, and in this book by Bill Holm, there's one thing I want to leave with, and that's a little poem. It's the box elder bug praise. I want so little for so little time, a south window, a wall to climb, a radio knob, nothing to eat, nothing to rob, not love, not power, not even a penny. Forgive me only for being so many. So I think that's a pretty good poem to talk about the kind of issues here where we have these nuisance invaders.